A few things about Alan before we get started talking with him. Alan Mendenhall, I mentioned he's the Associate Dean and Executive Director of the Blackstone Center for Law and Liberty at Faulkner University. Now, he's also author of several books, Literature and Liberty, and he wrote this in 2014. And Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. and the editor of the Southern Philosopher, collected essays of John William Corrington, did this in 2017. Now, also, Dr. Mendenhall holds a BA in English from Furman University and then MA in English from West Virginia University, JD from West Virginia University College of Law. And this guy's really English from Auburn University. He edits Southern Literary Review and has been legal associate at the Cato Institute. It just goes on and on. Now, he has authored hundreds of publications, and his academic writing has appeared or is forthcoming in, among other peer-reviewed journals, and law reviews. Now, the journal, Canadian Journal of Law, and the Texas Review of Law and Politics. And I really love talking with him about politics. As a matter of fact, very recently, we were going to be talking about Trump's nominee to replace Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court. And he's got a lot to say about him. He's been doing TV and radio interviews on him for the last couple of weeks. And in fact, the night that Gorsuch was as announced as a nominee, he went on BBC World News to discuss that. So I'm really excited to be talking with Mr. Mendenhall about that. And lots of great things going on. Okay, I think we're probably ready now. Good afternoon, Alan. How are you?
Hi, Donna. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. The wonders of radio. This is the radio world for you. But I'm just telling everybody it's well worth. Believe me, I can always find something to talk about. Great things going on here in DeKalb County, and it's awesome that you're on the show with us. So I have with me right now Alan Mendenhall. He's the Associate Dean and Executive Director of the Blackstone Center for Law and Liberty and the Faulkner University's Jones School of Law. So again, thank you so much, Alan, for being on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an exciting time to be talking to you about the judiciary and about Donald Trump's presidency, among other things.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start talking about that, about President Trump's nominee to replace Justice Scalia on the Supreme Court.
Sure, yeah. His nominee is Judge Neil Gorsuch, who is only 49 years old, and this is very young for a judge, which means he'll have, maybe 30 years, maybe more, of sitting on the U.S. Supreme Court if he's confirmed. Mm-hmm. Justice Ginsburg's 83, so that would give him, over 30 years on the bench if he were to stay on as long as she has. He is a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit and sits in Denver. He was nominated by President George W. Bush in 2006 to that seat, and he was confirmed unanimously by the Senate then on a voice vote. So he had Senators Obama, Biden, Hillary Clinton, Chuck Schumer, Leahy, and Feinstein all voting to confirm him in 2006. So it will be interesting to see if the Democrats decide to filibuster his nomination, what will have changed in the last 10 years that would make them all of a sudden decide that they do not want him on the bench.
Mm-hmm. So why would they not decide to have him on the bench? Is he too conservative?
Well, that's sort of up in the air. So he is an originalist or a textualist, and originalists adhere to the original public meaning of the Constitution. So they're sticking to the text of the Constitution. And as a textualist, he's looking at the plain meaning of statutes. And so that makes him not a judicial activist. He has clerked for Justice Kennedy on the U.S. Supreme Court. He clerked for Justice Byron White on the U.S. Supreme Court. He was a partner in private practice in D.C. He worked in the DOJ under George W. Bush. He is conservative, but he's not, a lightning rod of controversy. Mm-hmm. I would imagine if people like Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia or Claire McCaskill of Missouri voted against his nomination, which I don't.
Oh, hello.
Hi, can you hear me now?
That sounds really good. You know what? You and I really need to run ads for the cell phone companies. Hi, can you hear me now?
That's right.
So it's awesome. And a lot of things you were talking about with the Supreme Court replacement. And let's go ahead and dive a little bit more into that. You were talking about his age.
Yes, Gorsuch is 49, and what I was saying was that Justice Kennedy is 80, Justice Breyer's 78, Justice Ginsburg's 83. So the Democrats may be facing another nomination in the future, depending on what happens in the midterms elections in 2018. One of those other justices could retire, and if the Democrats spend all their political capital protesting the nomination of Gorsuch and forcing the Republicans to take the nuclear option, which would be that they would just need a majority vote of the Senate to confirm Gorsuch, then Donald Trump could pick somebody who is more controversial than Gorsuch. Gorsuch is sort of an uncontroversial figure with an impeccable pedigree and a lot of experience both in private practice and as a judge and as an attorney for the DOJ. And if the Democrats want to take that, want to filibuster and force the Republicans to take the nuclear option, then they may be extremely displeased with Donald Trump's next nomination.
It sounds like a bad case of a bad game of chess. As far as the Democrats are concerned at this point. What is his stance on abortion? Or is he showing anything?
He has never actually ruled on a case involving Roe v. Wade or its progeny, so he's never had a case directly on point. And it's hard to say for sure exactly what his view is on abortion. Now, we can infer his view from a book that he wrote on physician-assisted suicide, euthanasia, and he takes the stance of defending life against a person's alleged right to end his or her own life. He studied under a new natural lawyer, an Australian legal philosopher named John Finnis, who writes on issues of life. And while that's not necessarily dispositive of Judge Gorsuch's view, I think there is a fairly clear indication that he would be in favor of issues pertaining to life. Now, what'll be interesting to see is in the confirmation hearings whether he's asked that question directly. He won't be able to answer it directly, but he could be asked questions about case precedent and whether he believes Supreme Court justices ought to be able to, but ought to overturn precedent. And that could be revealing. It could suggest that he is willing to overturn prior cases.
That could be. What about his stance on freedom of religion?
Yeah, that's the one that a lot of people have been talking about. There was the Hobby Lobby case was a famous case, and he concurred in that opinion, and he sided with Hobby Lobby, and he maintained that the contraception mandate in Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act burdened Hobby Lobby's right to free exercise of their religion in violation of RFRA, which is the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. He also sided with the Little Sisters of the Poor in that case, and he joined a group of Tenth Circuit judges who dissented from the denial of rehearing after a panel of judges had ruled against the Little Sisters of the Poor. And his ground was that the judges had paid insufficient attention or respect to the Little Sisters' sincerely held religious opposition to providing contraception to employees. So there is some evidence that he will be a defender of religious liberty and the rights of employers to not just profess their religious beliefs, but actually act pursuant to them.
Awesome. Now, what do you think his stance is, or what do you think his intentions are when he called for a reconsideration of Chevron USA Incorporated versus the Natural Resources Defense Council?
Yeah, so that is a really exciting and kind of unique element of his jurisprudence. And it's
he was criticized heavily on that one.
He has been, and this is something that sets him apart from Justice Scalia, whose seat he would be filling. Justice Scalia, during most of his career, remained deferential to administrative agencies in their interpretation of their own powers under statute. and this gave administrative agencies a lot of wiggle room with interpretations, and they were able to, interpret the scope of their own powers, which meant that they could just keep adding to those powers.
Mm-hmm.
But the Chevron test, actually, it had a holding, so that it tells judges that you're supposed to ask two questions. First, when you're faced with a statute involving the powers of an administrative agency, or when you're addressing a statute involving an administrative agency, as a judge, you're first supposed to ask whether the congressional intent is clear.
Mm-hmm.
So if it is, then as a court, you just interpret the statute consistent with the intent of Congress, just with what that statute says.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the tricky part is step two. So if the statute is deemed ambiguous, then you just defer to whatever the agency's interpretation of the statute is, so long as that interpretation is reasonable. But reasonability can be you can have a lot of latitude in your interpretation of reasonability. So Judge Gorsuch wants to push back against that and really curb the excesses of bureaucratic powers that are a result of the administrative state. And this is important in my view because these administrative agencies are populated by people who are unaccountable to the voters. So you can't just vote these agencies out of office. They have a lot of power, and they operate almost like mini legislatures. And so they're essentially making law, but unlike a congressperson or a senator that you can vote out of office, these administrative agencies are people that just, have lifetime positions and can't be voted out. So if you don't like what they're doing, tough luck for you.
Mm-hmm. What are his thoughts, or what have you heard about his thoughts on the death penalty?
Well, I know he's in favor of the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
So he's come out in favor of the death penalty, and I think that was probably something that was a requirement for any one of Donald Trump's nominees. I should mention, by the way, that the Federal Society did an excellent job of vetting the list for Donald Trump and getting it down to those initial 10, and it was 21, but then breaking it down to the final 3 and then the final 2. So all of these judges that were on that list had been vetted by outside sources and would generally come down in conservative ways on the sort of the spectrum of left-right. They would all fall well onto the conservative side.
Well, it sounds to me he leans more towards conservative, but why do you think he was President Trump's pick?
Well, my guess is that he is just eminently confirmable. It's tough to criticize him for being, an intellectual lightweight. I mean, he's got a bachelor's from Columbia and a law degree from Harvard and a doctorate from Oxford. He was Phi Beta Kappa, a Harry Truman Scholar, a Marshall Scholar, clerked for the Supreme Court. He's been a judge on the 10th Circuit. He's worked in big law firms in D.C. I think it's just hard to call someone like that unqualified. So he's got the qualification box down. Mm-hmm. Now, he also was on the list of judges who had been vetted by the Federal Society and the Heritage Foundation. So that sort of gave him the conservative bona fides that Trump was looking for. And I think he is just a gentle, nice person. Mm-hmm. I think that it's tough to dislike him. So this is something that the Democrats were looking for when they when Obama put forth Merrick Garland as their nominee. Mm-hmm. But circumstances were different then, and Republicans held a majority. So there was really nothing the Democrats could do other than kind of complain about that. But,
Alan, we're going to have to go into a break, but hang around because I have another question. When we come back, what your thoughts, what he would have done with Obamacare? Would he have been the deciding factor on that? How would he have voted when we come back? Okay, be right back in just a few minutes, guys. I have with me right now Alan Mendenhall. He is the Associate Dean and Executive Director of the Blackstone Center for Law and Liberty at Faulkner University. And we've been talking about President Trump's choice for the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch. So let's go ahead and talk just a little bit more about that. And this has been my question. Had he been the deciding vote on Obamacare, how do you think he would have voted?
Well, I think he would not have voted the way John Roberts did. I don't think he would have been the deciding vote in that case because he's going to be filling Scalia's seat. So that opinion went down 5-4, and Chief Justice Roberts wrote the opinion where he upheld the individual mandate to buy health insurance as constitutional, but not under the Commerce Necessary and Proper Clause, but under the Congress's taxing power. So he said, that this individual mandate was a tax. Well, that to me is an extraordinary reading of the clause. I mean, I cannot fathom how Chief Justice Roberts reached that conclusion. I mean, I can because I've read the opinion, but it's still shocking to me that he would reach that conclusion. And I cannot see Gorsuch doing that because Gorsuch is a committed textualist, and he would, in my view, not be able to come to that kind of conclusion under the hermeneutics of textualism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you there. And let's talk just a little bit about President Trump. I mean, he hasn't exactly been welcomed in with the welcome wagon. And then also, last night, the award show, and I'm trying to find that information where the singer wore the, Make America Great Again gown. And
right.
I was seeing where actually her sales jumped. I mean, it was like an enormous, I had never heard of her before.
No, neither had I. I did read exactly what you read. It's Villa or something like that is her name.
Yeah.
I was not familiar.
And well, I take it, I want to go out there and buy one now. I mean, because she's not afraid, but she's had some death threats.
Oh, has she? Well,
yes.
I haven't heard that. I didn't know that. I know it's been it was talked about quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I've only seen the pictures. I wasn't watching it when it happened to hear sort of the reactions of the announcers, but it was sort of a fascinating thing to see,
mm-hmm.
even if it wasn't, even if not in real time.
Mm-hmm. Her name is Joy Villa.
Joy, that's right.
Yeah, Joy Villa. And so the response I'm seeing, people are, they like it. But now these are real Americans who are responding. So, and when I say real Americans, I mean real Americans.
Right.
And so it says that her album sales exploded 18 million% within hours, 18 million% within hours of wearing the Make America Great Again dress at the Grammys.
Wow. Well, it does, it raises questions. I know, Kellyanne Conway got some flack for allegedly promoting Ivanka Trump's line after Nordstrom mm-hmm. dropped her, and some other things like that. But it does make you sort of wonder if these companies, if they're motivated by profit maximization, why, as companies typically are, that's what companies do,
mm-hmm. why
would they be hurting their bottom line with political protestations? And I don't know the answer to that question other than these are unprecedented times.
Well, I'll have to tell you now, I would like to have an Ivanka Trump handbag. I mean, I want one now. I mean, it's just, really, I think it's a great, it reminds you of the old Don't Throw Me in the Briar Patch story.
Right.
It kind of reminds you of that because every time something happens, it winds up going for the better on President Trump and his family. So why all the protests? What in the world? I mean,
I guess there's just a lot going on. I know that people are suggesting that Donald Trump has just come out and delivered a bunch of executive orders and executive memoranda, and he has, but during his first week of the presidency, the number of executive orders he issued was roughly the same, if not the same, as the number that President Obama issued. Now that we're a few weeks in, that number may have changed, but I think that media attention and media scrutiny has been directed at Trump's administration in a way that was not It wasn't in a way that it was not during President Obama's presidency.
Well, I remember when President Obama came in and his very first press conference, people were just like giddy. I mean, they were just, asking really easy questions. And I mean, I didn't see anyone having remorse over him being president of the United States. Now, I didn't vote for him either time, but when he did come in as president, I had to respect it. And, I was just really in hopes that he had some kind of a mastermind plan that I couldn't see. I just wasn't smart enough to see the plan. And, we have President of the United States, Donald Trump. And, I mean, like it or not, why should folks have so much? I mean, it's like there's no reference to the presidency.
Well, and you see some of that reporting, some of that reaction in, for example, the executive order, the one about protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States, the immigration order at 13769, I think is the number for it, and that's the one that is currently pending in the U.S. District Court in the Western District of Washington that went up to the Ninth Circuit. And you see a lot of sort of irrational protesting surrounding that opinion. The 7 countries that are actually listed in that executive order were labeled countries of concern by the Obama administration.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Donald Trump is just borrowing from what his predecessor did, but his executive order, of course, does a lot more things. I mean, for one thing, it placed a limit on the number of refugees. For example, the Syrian refugees in 2017 to 50,000. Mm-hmm. And it suspended the U.S. refugee admissions program for 120 days. But these are not permanent things. These are just conditional and temporary measures. The 7 countries that the order suspended entry for were Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. And that suspension of entry was just for 90 days. So these are just temporary orders. Mm-hmm. So it is sort of amazing that they would provoke such backlash to the extent where protesters are shutting down airports and disrupting travel. And I think Donald Trump's probably going to win this one. It's still unclear what he's going to do at this moment. We don't know whether he's going to issue a new executive order, which is what I thought may happen today. Mm-hmm. We don't know whether he's going to take the case back down to the district court and have a trial on the merits, or if he's going to try to seek a hearing en banc before all the judges of the circuit, or if he's going to seek an emergency stay at the U.S. Supreme Court. We really don't know. I mean, his argument at the district court was that the Constitution grants him unreviewable authority over immigration matters, and that non-citizens don't have due process rights because the order has an effect on non-citizens. But if you are not a citizen of the United States, then you don't get constitutional due process rights. That was part of his argument. Mm-hmm. Wow. And it's the case being brought by the state of Washington and Minnesota. There's another question, which is the Constitution, Article 3 of the Constitution, requires that federal courts can decide cases and controversies. Well, that has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to mean that a plaintiff that brings a case to federal court has to suffer an injury. In fact, they have to actually have been injured. So the question is, well, what injury did Washington and Minnesota suffer in this case? And, they claim things like, well, our universities are going to suffer because of faculty members and students and that may be nationals of one of those 7 countries I just mentioned. But that seems to be a weak argument. And then the other argument that President Trump has is is based on this statutory provision that gives the president power over entry of aliens or any class of aliens, I think is what the statute has, and could suspend entry of them or and pose restrictions on their entry into the country. And that gives him vast sweeping powers, and the Ninth Circuit in their ruling said nothing about it. They were just silent. So I think if Trump does take this case up to the Supreme Court, or even if he tries it at the district court level, I think if the judges are honest about what the law is, they'll have to rule in favor of the administration and President Trump. But
well, it's just that, all of the disrespect that's going on right now. I mean, again, I didn't vote for President Obama either time, but he was our president. And, you had to have respect for that presidency. And I didn't go out with signs and and I didn't get on the air and talk about it. I just, it's just that, you got to have respect.
Well, and that's right. I think the Tea Party movement showed that people could demonstrate in a civil manner, and there were town hall meetings and debates in the public square and real efforts to tap into that Republican ethos of the founding generation. Whereas some of the protests you see against Donald Trump involve the destruction of private property, they involve looting, and that is not okay.
No, it's not.
That's illegal. So there's a big difference between promoting, civic engagement, Republican virtues versus destruction and demolition.
Well, I was a member of the Tea Party when we were living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and so we were at a rally, and it was at the courthouse steps, downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, and my husband sent a text to me on the cell phone and wanted to know what was going on. And nothing. People were saying they wanted the country back and stuff like that, but no one was upset, breaking anything. Nobody was, breaking windows or anything like that. But the liberal news media in Charlotte was reporting that we were just having to be carried away and just really going all crazy. And I said, no, we're not. And I was sending text of pictures that, no, we're just having a civilized rally here. But the media had it spun another way.
And I have seen stuff like that so many times over the past few years where I've been involved on a situation on the ground, or I've been present in a situation on the ground, and the reporting that has come out of that situation has not mirrored the actual felt reality of the situation. And that has really shaken my faith in the independence and objectiveness of much of the media.
Absolutely. And it seems like the party who really promotes non-bullying are the biggest bullies of all.
Right. That's the old quip about, you can promote tolerance except for the things that you're intolerant about. So
let's talk a little bit about Senator Jeff Sessions, Attorney General of the United States.
Yeah, that is very exciting. I'm very happy for Senator Sessions, and I'm not surprised that he was confirmed. I think his confirmation vote was 52-47. So
but what a battle it was!
Yeah, it was quite a battle, and I'm not surprised that he prevailed. And it will be interesting to see how he runs the DOJ. I'm curious about that. It will be interesting to see as well who gets some of the U.S. attorney appointments in different districts throughout the country, and even here in Alabama, we'll probably be seeing some new U.S. attorneys come into office, and I'm excited to see what happens.
I'm excited too. How do you think the selection of Senator Sessions as the Attorney General of the United States will affect Alabama, the state of Alabama?
Well, in the most obvious way, I guess his confirmation left a vacancy in the U.S. Senate. Of course, Governor Bentley appointed Luther Strange to fill that seat. And so in the most immediate way, it would be in filling that seat. Now, I do think Senator Strange now is is somebody that shares Sessions' values and worldview and will work to complete what Senator Sessions, or I guess now Attorney General Sessions, it's funny because you went from Attorney General Strange to Senator Strange and Senator Sessions to Attorney General Strange. It's easy to flip those, get those mixed up. But I think Jeff Sessions will be pleased with Senator Strange's work as a senator.
What about everything that's going on in California? They're begging for help at this point now with President Trump. However, they don't want to change their views because they really went to the tank.
Well, it's really interesting. There's this growing movement to call for California secession, and I would love to see California secede. I think that would be great, but. And there's also a move to break up the Ninth Circuit that some of the people on the right are talking about, and that would be interesting to see because Congress has the power to do that. And there's so much to talk about with California. I mean, the Berkeley protests last week were pretty shocking. Again, this goes back to the protests involving the destruction of private property. This was not specifically about President Trump, but of
okay, if you're getting something, why are you tearing up your own property? That's my point.
Right.
It makes absolutely no sense.
Well, they're tearing up school property, which, that's a public institution, so they're basically
they're pretty liberal there. I mean, that's the point. I don't get their point.
Well, I guess they're tearing taxpayer money, really, when they're destroying buildings and property constructed on the taxpayer's dime.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe California would be a great place to start building the wall. It would be a good place.
Oh, well, I can remember when I was young, I was watching television, and it was before 1996, and I can remember why it was before 1996 because this guy on television was sitting up there talking about how California by 1996 would fall into the ocean.
Oh, we always heard about that.
And here we are in 2017, and it's still there.
They are. But, I've got to go back and retract something I just said. I have some amazing friends from California who are the most conservative people you will ever meet, more conservative than anybody you would meet in Alabama. So is it really the citizens who are in California, or is it a few folks who actually are in politics who rule it?
Well, it could be. It could be a little bit of both. When it comes to these types of assessments, it's hard to say whether with protests in particular, who's behind them, who's funding them, who's organizing them. They don't just spontaneously pop up out of nowhere. No. There's a lot of organization that goes into, especially these massive rallies, and it's one of those follow the money kind of things. And if you trace the trail back long enough, you can sort of see who's instigating. But you're right about there being a lot of conservatives. Ronald Reagan was conservative from California. Ed Meese was a conservative from California.
Clint Eastwood. How much more conservative can you be than he is?
That's right. Yeah. So, it would be wrong to just dismiss the entire state. Although if they wanted to secede, I certainly wouldn't be putting a roadblock in the way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's absolutely. I'm talking right now with Alan Mendenhall. He's the Associate Dean and Executive Director of Blackstone Center for Law and Liberty at Faulkner University. We're talking about California. And so let me ask a question to you, Alan. Is Hollywood leading the United States? Actors and actresses.
No, I don't think so. I think actually that they are overestimating their powers and undermining their credibility. I think people are caring less and less about what Hollywood actors and actresses have to say about political issues because, quite frankly, they have discredited themselves and they're unable to make reasonable comments about pressing matters of public policy. And when you screech and whine without providing evidence of your views, or when you are just too emotional and are unable to articulate your position in a careful, civil, nuanced way, then you will gradually lose credibility. And I believe that's what's happening with a lot of Hollywood.
I think so too. Phil and I have always been big movie buffs. Of course, it's turning into now all old movies and westerns and that kind of thing. But the first thing we do, I've always loved to go to the movies. And so one of the first things we do now when we're deciding on a movie is who's in it. And if it's anyone who is of the elite Hollywood, who, they hate America, it appears, and they don't show respect for, President Trump, I just don't want to see it. I don't want to give any money to that.
Well, I understand that impulse. I always try to separate sort of the art from the politics if it's possible. I mean, I don't want, I respect someone who's got a talent for acting. I think acting is something that is not for everyone. Not everyone. It's not something that you're just born knowing how to do, but certain people do have a knack for it. And if somebody is a good actor or actress, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and let them.
Would you go see a movie with Sean Penn in it?
Well, it would just depend on the film. I wouldn't skip it just because he was in it. But if it were, a film that I thought was too politicized in some way and that the politicization of it was going to detract from the artistic merit of the piece, then I would probably skip it. But I did write an interesting piece. It actually came out in the Daily Caller 1 week ago called Donald Trump the Cowboy, and it's all about how the foundational figure in American cinema is this nomadic cowboy, this romantic hero at the frontier whose moral ambiguity thrills and troubles us. And I talk about how Donald Trump is he recalls that figure. I think he's he's the semiotic mutation of a cowboy, I think what I call him. Because of just because, the cowboy stands up to the cattle baron cronies, and Donald Trump takes on the leading news outlets and the establishment, and he's always outmatched by gangs of rivals and proving pollsters and the commentariat wrong against all odds. And he's sort of vague on political positions, like old Rough and Ready, and his comments about the border recall all these different border anxieties in all the old Western films. I'm thinking of John Wayne and the Searchers, and things like that. And then we hear all these comments about fake news, Donald Trump fake news, and then I think of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and that phrase, which is when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. And there you could go on. There are all these interesting connections where Trump may be some sort of cowboy figure in our imagination in a way that we're not fully aware of.
Great analogy. That's awesome. Less than a minute left in the segment. And it's always great to have you on the show, Alan. It's always a quick hour. You've got about 30 seconds left. Anything you would like to say real quick?
Well, I guess I'm excited about all the things going on in our nation and in our state, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they all play out in the coming months.
Awesome. Alan, we're going to have to call it a night. Thank you again so much for being on the show.
Thanks.
It's always great to have you.